Welcome to Cosmic Connections. I am Starling Brighter. I'm here with Faye Cochran and Christopher Pridham, my partners in this. We are doing another one of our episodes where we feature one of the speakers of the Cosmic Patterns Conference that's coming up in March of 2025. So today we have Georgia Stathis with us. Hi, Georgia. How are you doing today?
Hi, guys. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, great. So I'll just introduce Georgia a little bit. So Georgia has been an astrologer since the early 70s. So she's been teaching. She has taught at the Kepler College and the undergraduate program. She also has many publications and different books. So, two of them I will highlight here: Pushing Through Time and Business Astrology 101, which I think those are always good books to understand, those topics to understand when we're astrologers. She also serves as the chair of a really interesting site. It is called the Alexandra iBase. It's not just a website. It is also a nonprofit where we'll ask her some of the questions about what she does there. She offers classes, events, and forecasts at her website, which is starcycles.com. Georgia, I'm really curious, what drew you first? I always like to ask this question first because I think we get so much wisdom from understanding where other people's past came from. But what drew you into astrology at such a young age in the 70s? And you know, what pulled you in? What was the event that happened in your life?
Well, it was two different events, but the second event clicked. The first event was when I was little. I mean, between 7 years old and about, 14. We had to go to Greek school after American school. I was first generation Greek, and we learned about the myths. And as I was getting a little older, I'd make a quarter to do the housework. And about 10 years old, I'd go to the local drugstore and buy these little books that were birthday books. I didn't know it was astrology, though. There were the Dell books that used to be like, 15, 20 cents. And I bought them to read about people's birthdays, but they had the symbols, but I didn't make that connection. And so fast forward, I came to California in my early 20s, and I was working at a public relations firm in San Francisco. And I was married at the time, and he had a radio show. And this woman came in that was a temp, Irish, very Irish, with an Irish brogue, a beautiful woman. And she sat next to me, and on the break, she pulled out this book, which was Joan Quigley's book, Astrology for Adults, right? And she's reading this on the break, big, thick book. And I was sitting at my desk, and I looked at it, and I said, I think I used to read about that, whatever you're reading about. And she says to me, "Oh, this is a wonderful book." She gives me the book to take home. A big, thick book. I read it in 3 days. I brought it back to her. That was her last day. And then I talked to my then husband. He says, "Oh, yeah, we're going to have some astrologers on the show, on my radio show." I said, "I think I want to hear this show." So I heard it, and it looked interesting. And I went and got a reading. And because I was working since I was basically 10 years old. I've worked in a lot of jobs, and it wasn't child abuse. It was just I wanted to make money, and that's what you did whatever you could to make your own money, right? And so I started studying and studying. I was reading 15 books at a time. Didn't have any classes in those days. They didn't have any classes. Yeah. And then as I was getting into my late 20s, I decided to go back to school for my master's in business. I was selling real estate. I'd been in advertising, public relations, newspaper reporting. And I decided to write my thesis on vocational characteristics in the charts of advertising people. Whoa. And it was it was Pepperdine University, Christian University down in Malibu. And one of the professors did not like the idea, but he said, if she can do the work, and check out the stats. So I had two very supportive professors. There were three. And we did the statistics, and I wrote the paper, and I just decided, I was selling real estate at the time, and I decided, well, maybe I should just try it for a while. And I started doing it for free for people at lunch. When I was selling real estate and selling advertising, I would take people, they would take me to lunch and I read their charts for 10 minutes. And I started to get finally, because I started reading about companies and I got really interested in that. I was always interested in that. And I thought, well, maybe I should go for it. And I
Wow.
did.
Wow.
Wow.
And it's the least boring job I've ever had.
Exciting.
That I've stuck with for the longest amount of time. I mean, I'm still an investor, but I have that in a kind of separate umbrella. I've seen clients for probably 40 years. And I've seen a lot of clients. I had an office at one point. I was seeing about 6 people a day. I mean, because I had to support my children, a single mother. And now in the last year, I decided to take a break from client work because we're archiving all my 50 years of work with an engineer. And I want to write another book if I can get some time. And I have a lot of projects on the back burner that need to be done, but I just love this work. It never is boring.
Right.
Right. I mean, and it's so good for your brain.
Yeah. It keeps you young, if
it's
you
like
will.
It's like Astro Sudoku, I mean, just always have something new going on, and I do miss seeing client work, but I do see some friends, or some clients that kind of squeak in if they really need some help right now. But I'm trying to pull away because, when I work with writing, like projects and stuff, for me, it's much more macro thinking. And when you work with private charts, it's very micro thinking. And it's 2 very different ways to work. And I have Saturn in Virgo, but Sun in Pisces. So, either I'm going to work details or I'm going to work the other way. So, and I do take about an hour, at least an hour to prepare for each client. To this day, I won't go into a session cold. I just can't do that. So that's how I got into it. That's a long way around the horn, how I got into it.
Wow.
It's great though that it's I love it because it shows, if anybody's new to astrology, happens to find this podcast, it shows that you can really do something with yourself with astrology. Just it's an immersion, if you will, because that's the way I've come to understand it, that it's part of your life. It's not necessarily a lifestyle, but it's part of your life. And it just becomes, and I don't think any of us, it sounds like you too, Georgia, would live a life without astrology there. All events would happen, whatever happens, but the astrology is still running in the background, and
it's always been there. Regardless of all the chaos and tragedies in my life, because there have been a few, it's always been a chord, and it's, for me particularly, it's very grounding to me. Because if I'm going into a Pisces multi-universe, which I tend to do sometimes, it brings me right back down to earth to go, okay, this makes sense, what's happening here. And then I can get focused, So
yeah, it's grounding.
It's grounding work. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps you also understand, and we touched on this on a podcast with Ann Ortley, but about depression. It helps you understand these phases that you go through and how to maneuver through them in the best way. So that's what I really love about, one of the things I really love about astrology. So
yeah, nothing lasts forever,
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah. So as I was looking through your work and just kind of learning more about you so that I could be, have questions to ask you, I came across an article talking about how you developed the age cycles tool. And it's a unique tool. Do you still use it?
All the time.
You do? Because this is a couple years old.
Yeah, no, I still use it. The very first thing I do is look at how old they are. Because if I don't know how old they are, I don't know where they are in terms of the age cycle development. And when I did that workshop, I think I first did it in Mexico, but I don't know. It's on the website available, for download. But I put a grid together showing, this, because I'm a cycles person. That's pushing through time is about synodic cycles. I've always been a cycles person. That's probably Uranus in the second house. And I just thought, we've got to make some sense out of this, I mean, I know, like Arlene Kramer was actually, we were talking about her earlier. She's the one that kind of got me thinking about this when she said she wouldn't see anybody till they were about 45, because that's the semi-square of solar arc planets to the natal position and the Saturn opposition. And that's what got, actually that is what got me looking at both ends of it, going on either side of the 45th year, you know,
Oh,
and it helps because we all know if they're going to be 30, they're going through a Saturn return, you know, and that
right,
they're having a secondary progressed return of their moon at the same time.
right.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of little subtle things like around, it depends on what time of year you're born. And that's what I do talk about in the age cycles workshop is, you know, if you're born winter, it's going to be faster, summer, it's going to be slower. But around 72, 73, 71 is the quintile position of all the solar arc planets to the natal position, which is the degree of evolutionary development. I remembered a few things when I was studying aspects when I was very young, and that the evolutionary opportunity comes at 72nd year. You know, the sextile was well, the way I look at the sextile, if it's a snake, it would no semi-square. If it was a snake, it would have bit you because you don't see it coming. And the sextile is a combination of opportunity and experience. So those, you know, you have certain things with solar. I do solar arc work a lot, but in age cycles, it's very, very important, and you can point that out to somebody to help them understand, okay, you're doing this now at this age, but you're having a progression at the same time that's doing this solar arc. And of course, you say it in English so they understand it.
Yeah. 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 That's really interesting. Yeah. That was fascinating to me when I was reading that about what you've done with what was it called? The age cycles tool. Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So I wanted to ask you.
And there's another one that's really very interesting that Jim Valliere, who used to do, I'm sure Faye knew him. Jim Valliere was way back in the 70s and 80s. He might still be around, who did one of the first graphic ephemerises. And I had
I remember him.
Remember him?
Yes.
See, I remember all these old people, you know, old.
I'm so old too. And when I was young, that's when I got exposed to them.
He was very smart because he did a thing
Yeah.
where nobody ever taught me this, but based on when the eclipse happens before your birth, because if it's a little further back in your lifetime, you're going to have this. If it was right before your birth, you're probably not going to have it. But watch the year that the secondary progression is an eclipse.
Oh.
Because that is a life-changing year. And that's what Jim Valliere taught me. And I watch for that with people. I look at, okay, because I do a lot of work with eclipses too. How far back was the last solar eclipse or lunar eclipse before their birth? Because if it's a little further back, if they live a normal life, at some point, their progressed chart is going to be eclipsed that year.
Right.
And that's an important year to pay attention to because it's a life-changing year for people. And they're about 14 years apart because eclipses are 14 days apart, which is 14 years. And so that's another weird little, I'm one of these detail nuts. That's another way to look to see if, you know, and they know what's going on. This is the thing about people. They come into you. They've got a real feeling intuitively something's happening. Our job is to validate the subjective experience. And you see something like that happening. Well, you're absolutely right. These are the dates it's probably going to happen, which I have no problem giving dates. I know a lot of us, my colleagues, don't like to predict, but I do like to give dates. And so, yeah, I mean, that's another really, it's not really an age cycle, but it is sort of an age cycle, you know. And of course, the nodal returns, which is when the eclipse comes back to your birth. You know, these are all important things to look at for people because when people come to see you, they never really show up when they're having a good life.
Of course.
No, of course.
I have one friend who's an astrologer who has a strong Jupiter, and she always gets the good clients, the easy ones. She's always talking about, oh, they're so wonderful, and it's so wonderful to work with them. And she's got like an angular Jupiter, you know. I got all this Saturn and Pluto, and I get all the tough stuff. But anyway, yeah, they don't come to you when they're having a good time. They come to you when they're having a really challenging time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, I when I look at charts, I look at their age one. To me, life begins at home, so I start at that age, the very first time they grew up. So I start there. So it's in an age cycle as well.
Yeah, that's an age cycle too, you know, and there's a lot of really interesting things, you know, perfections. You know, the age point, the Hoobers used to work with the age point. I don't know if you know who they were. Lillian and her husband, I remember Lillian. They wrote a book on age points.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating when you came to the middle of the quadrant of the chart, because that's like the dead zone. You know, when it's basically 6 years for each house. So when you get to the middle of between the first and the fourth house, the middle of that quadrant is when it kind of it's like a pothole
It's like
that you
it
fall into for
completes
about
it.
a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the Hooper work
Interesting.
going way back. Yeah, they were pretty interesting people.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. And that's something that's so cool about being in this world of astrology. You know, since a young age, you get to know so many different people that have different ideas, and, you know, working with them and the mind that you have and how you like to analyze things. You work with it and see, does it work? You know, is it something
Yeah.
that
That's
fits
what you
into
do.
someone's
Does
life?
it work? You know,
Yeah.
it
Right.
does it. You don't
Yeah,
just take it you don't just take it like, oh, that's what they
Right.
said.
You have to play
Right.
with it.
You pursue it, you know. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
I think that's actually in our business. It is a business.
Right.
It's a
Right.
calling
Yeah.
and it's a business at the same time. I think in our business, if people want to really look at this as a serious industry, they have to be willing to go down all those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people are not willing to do that because they think, oh, you know, and I
Difficult.
do. Yeah,
Good
it's very
work.
superficial. I see a lot of very superficial, I hate to say it, a lot of superficial astrology on the internet. You know, just because it's virtual doesn't mean it's smart, you know.
No.
And yet there's some very good work that's on there now too, you know.
Right.
Yes, that's the thing. There's wonderful things, but to a novice, how do you tell the difference? And usually it's my perception, at least, the ones that know what they're talking about maybe aren't as exciting as, and like, you know, kind of get your attention really quick as the ones that are kind of doing the crappy astrology. I shouldn't say crappy, but like the astrology that's like very pop, you know, where it's not like, you know, has a lot of sincerity to it. So, you know, I guess that's something we all learn too, is when we're, you know, growing up in this digital world, to decipher what is what. But yeah, that's why I'm really, that's why I think it was really cool that we were able to organize talking to so many astrologers that have been, you know, respected in their field for decades, you know, being able to talk with you guys. I mean, I think it's so great because it's also bringing awareness to the people that have been here for, you know, decades, that can share their experience with you, that you might want to read their book, you know, you might want to come to the lecture and hear what they're talking about. Yeah. And speaking of lectures, we were going to talk and touch on what you were going to speak about at the Cosmic Patterns Conference. And your lecture description is really, I'm so excited to listen to it because, and I'll tell you why, but your lecture description is what happens in the void and when will we get there? And what you mean by the void, if I'm not mistaken, is the 0 to 29 degree mark. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, there's a other void, you know, when your planet is void. I will be talking about those differences in my lecture, but there is, and this is what I'm going to cover in the lecture at the live conference, which I'm very excited, Faye, that we're having actually a real live human being conference with real people where you can actually see what they're thinking in the audience. So you're not thinking, are they getting it or not? Okay. So thank you everybody for organizing that, because I think live is just as important as, I mean, I think virtual is good too, but I think we really needed it. But going back to the topic, the reason I decided to do this, and again, this was triggered by somebody I heard many years ago, who's dead now, Helen Garrett. And you all don't know who she was, and her husband. And they used to be at the old AFA conferences. And they made all these little tiny books that were on this thing called mimeograph. It was mimeograph, where you typed into this wax form and then they stapled them together. They were brilliant people. And she gave a lecture when I was just starting out about the anaretic degree. And it stuck with me, you know. I mean, it probably stuck with me because I have a couple 29 degree things, and, you know, like it does with all of us, right? And I remember her talking about this, and I will talk about this in the lecture. She said the 29th degree is the tail that wags the dog. In other words, all this experience, she explained, there's this little puppy that's beautiful wandering through the swamp. It's all fluffy, and all of a sudden goes through the swamp and the grass, and it's living its life. And by the time it gets out of the swamp, this little puppy has this heavy laden tail that's full of all this stuff that's wagging the dog. And that's what the anaretic degree is about. It's about it's what's the word I'm looking for?
Culminating?
It's the culmination. Thank you.
Yeah.
The culmination of the last years that this, especially the slow planets, of all the stuff that's good and bad that needs a place to go. And when you're in a transition in the 29 degrees, we just had, July 2nd this year was 29 degrees, 55 minutes. July 2nd. The day before that, the Supreme Court came down and said the immunity thing about Trump. And in the 3 or 4 days before that thing went retrograde, they did the Chevron decision. They did they made these very strange decisions, which I think, of course, will be overturned over course because it was at 29:55 that they made these decisions, right?
Yeah, it was waxing.
It was at the end, right? And in Horary, if you study Horary, which I did study for a long time, I'm not a Horary astrologer. Lee Lehman is a Horary astrologer.
That's who I studied with. Yeah.
She's a very good friend of mine, and she's very good teacher.
Yes.
She was our dean at Kepler.
Yes.
And she, she always said 29, it's too late.
Yeah.
And so it's the end, and we have a lot of those coming up. We not only have Neptune, which is in and out for 2 years. In spring, we're going to have Saturn at 29. In July of next year, Uranus is going to go from 29 Taurus to 0 Gemini through November. These are all like, what I look at when you see 29 it's changing back, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All of them are going back and forth. It's like you're going to rent a room or you're going to rent a house or buy a house. You walk in the room, you look around to see if you like it, and then you leave. That's 29 going into 0, going back to 29. Do I want this house or do I not want this house?
That's a good visual.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's like walking into a place. Do I want to buy this thing or rent it? I'm not sure. It's a preview at the movies. It's the trailers of movies. Do I want to see this or I don't? And we don't have all the answers in the void, you know? And so one of the things I'm going to be talking about, because I've also studied Japanese work, and I studied the Book of Five Rings by Musashi, who wrote a samurai manual, which was used in the Harvard MBA. And he has 5 chapters, one of which is the Book of the Void. And he's got a completely different view of what a void is. He says his void is where the magic happens. That's his version of the void, is where all the magic happens, right?
Sounds like he focused on the positive.
That's right. Right. Yes. So, these are the things I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to giving specific charts that had 29 degrees active when certain things happened. Because you have to give examples of what you're talking about. I'm a very visual teacher. I like to have my PowerPoints and my visuals very clear, and it'll be very clear. So I hope people show up. So we'll see. If not, I'm going to have fun.
I'm going to be stuck on it because I'll tell you, I have several 0 and 29 degree planets.
There you go.
So one of them being Saturn, and then the other 2 being the Sun and Moon. So I'm like, very
you have a lot of 29s and 0s.
Yes, I do. Yep. So I'm very interested in this particular topic because of that. Yep. And of course,
she tends to live in the void. So
she lives in the void, huh? Well, that's where the magic
But I show up on YouTube once in a while, and occasionally at conferences if they're good. Okay,
that's the magic
conference.
That's the magic. That's the magic.
But it's fascinating to me too. And when I was like just learning about astrology, I probably didn't coin it, but I coined it to myself. I called myself a Capricornius because they're Aquarius.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, because I'm right there on the cusp. I'm only 18 minutes in, and I know there's no cusp. I know we're one or the other, but it's just like in that same day, had I been born a few hours earlier, I would have a Sagittarius moon, but I have a Capricorn moon. So, and my significant other has a 29 Capricorn sun. So our suns are conjunct, but by less than a degree. So it's very interesting.
This is interesting because if you have a lot of 29s, there's a change within the first year of life. You know, I had a client. I remember when I first started out, I was young and dumb, right? I wasn't that dumb. Had been doing some work, but I was not as I'm less dumb now. Okay, let's just put it that way. Anyway, I was giving, because I gave a lot of lectures to straight groups like the real estate board, Contra Costa Realtors, you know, because I was in the business and on cycles and astrology. Again, young and dumb. In those days, I didn't know people thought I was probably crazy in the 70s. But she came up to me, this woman, beautiful, beautiful woman. Her name was Nancy. She had a big escrow company in Southern California, very well coiffed, really great energy. And it was like a Friday, I was doing this lecture or something. And I had kids. I don't work on weekends. And she comes up to me. She says, I'm only here 2 days, Georgia. I would like you to do my chart. I said, well, how about if you come in on Monday? And she says, no, I'm only here through Sunday night, but I know you can do it. She was very, you know, calm, right? And I said, but I don't really see people on weekends. And, you know, but Georgia, I know that you can do it, right? And she was so persistent. I thought, okay, I'll do it. So I did the chart. I look at this chart. All the house cusps were 29 degrees.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, did I make a mistake? I went back, I calculate. I didn't make a mistake. So she comes in and I said to her, and that's why I said about your chart, you know, I said, Nancy, her name was, I wish I still had that chart. I said, Nancy, I'm just curious. Did your life markedly change in the first year after you were born? And she said, absolutely. She says, my mother, I don't know who my birth mother was. My mother abandoned me on the firehouse or the hospital, but with my birth certificate. That's why she knew her time. And she was adopted by a family who raised her, educated her, and she was very well educated, very smart, very elegant woman, and was grateful to her mother, who she never knew, that did that to her.
Wow.
And that was, I mean, every time I remember the story about her, I get the chills, because that had to be 40 years ago when I saw her. And I thought, my God, there's something very powerful here about this 29th degree. You know, her life changed. I mean, all the houses were 29.
That's my mother.
Is that your mother?
Your mother?
My mother is 29 degrees on everyone, and her mother died in the first year of her life, and she never knew her father.
See?
Wow. I didn't
Your
know
mother's not Nancy, is she?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, my mother's Cammie, but it's you know, when you were talking, I just pulled her chart up because let me make sure. Yep. Because what you were describing is very much my mother. So
she died in the first year.
Her mother died in her first year. She never knew her father. I only discovered who her father was 2 years ago. My mother is 80. What is she, 85? Yeah.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's a fascinating. I'd love to see that chart.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to see that, because I have never seen anything like that since. And I've done a lot of
2908.
Wow.
It's 29 degrees, 8 minutes, Aquarius.
Is what you look at, Georgia, is the house cusp and also the planetary positions inside?
They were just the house cusps.
Just the house cusp.
Oh, you're asking about the 29th degree.
For your system, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the planet at 29 degrees, I always look at not only the planet and where it's placed, but the house it rules.
Yeah.
See, this is just because it's in one house, it means it's going to rule one or two houses in the chart. Because I don't use the whole.
Right.
I'm not against the whole sign system. I'm not going to say anything bad about the whole sign system, but I'm a Koch house system person, because I work with real people who have real issues, you know, and I work with all the planets, right? But I do watch if there's a planet, even by progression, you know, if you have like the solar arcs are going to be a lot slower, only 1 degree a year. So, and you can't really count them much, but you know, I had a guy, he was in the butcher business in his 20s, and he came to me, wanted to be a contractor. He came to me when solar arc Saturn was at Aries, 29 degrees. And the next year he went into the contracting business.
Wow.
That it was the ruler of his midheaven. So, you know, I mean, that's how I look at it. Okay. If it's a secondary progression, unless it's a faster planet, that's going to move faster. I mean, the moon is the fastest, but you know, those outer planets and the secondaries were hardly going to do it. But if they do a change from 29 to 0, that's going to be a significant year. And you want to look at the house or houses that planet rules. because
Yeah.
that gives you the three-dimensional take on the chart, not just the flat chart.
Yeah,
You know?
that makes sense. Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah.
Right. Would you think that there can be confusing time as well in this person's life with all those 29 degrees? The reason why I'm asking is confusing time, because some of them, okay, I'm 29. What is this position move to the next sign? What would I be like? How can I experience that? So it's kind of a tricky question to answer. Then you will say, oh, it depends on your time of birth. So how would you answer that?
Well, you got to have the right time of birth. You know, I mean, I won't work with people unless they do have a time of birth.
Hmm.
If somebody is, I mean, I just don't do that. I know it's terrible probably to do that, but I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that if you want to make astrology seem legitimate, you got to do good work. And the only
Right.
way you're going to do good work is to get an accurate time of birth. And some
Right.
people will say, oh, between 4 and 5 o'clock. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to work with you.
Right.
I'm not going to bother to rectify it. But, you know, and it depends on the state. It depends on their age. Sometimes, you know, you push them to get the time of birth, and the time they thought they find the birth certificate was not the right time. So
Right.
the time of birth is going to make a difference. Now, you know, then there's all this little, what we call the little gray areas, right? The gray areas, right? Some
Right.
people, you know, like if you look, I'm not a heliocentric astrologer, but sometimes if you look at the helio, especially the slower planets, right? They're going to be a little off. They might be a little at the 29th degree or at 0. I think I'm not sure about Pluto right now, but it might already be helio. I'm not sure. I should check it. But
So-
there is this gray area, you know. And in fact, I was just reading an article by Priscilla Costello, who's another really good astrologer out of Canada, who wrote a book on Shakespeare and the Bard because she was an English teacher. And she wrote an article in NCGR from last fall. I'm catching up on my reading. And she said she had an interesting article that she uses, which I don't, but she had a reason for doing this. She uses up to 10 degrees because,
oh,
and she does that as a preparation for the client.
oh,
Her
okay.
approach is to prepare the person who is going to go through a pretty big change, right? In say 5 years or something, to prepare them that this is coming. And that's how
I
she looks
see.
at it, as preparation, because the way she worded in the article, I was just reading it last night, is because some people, their changes will come in waves. You know, you get a wave and then it
Oh,
recedes, and then you get a wave. And I've noticed, like with people who have a very strong Saturn in the chart, they're always late to get it
I
because they're slow. They're
see.
not slow, stupid. They're just slower in terms of getting something because they're thick
Yeah,
skinned and thick headed, and it takes a while for them to kind of get permeated, right?
I see.
And maybe a Marsy type person is going to get it a lot sooner, right?
Yeah.
I
I'm
see.
laughing because all the rulers of my inner planets are Saturn, and then my Mars is in Taurus in the 12th
Yeah.
house. So,
So
yeah,
if
I'm that person that needs to go over it 50,000 times before
Chris,
I
don't say
really get
anything.
it.
Look
what's
at
he
Chris.
laughing about?
Well, because we've already established she's in the void, and now we're establishing that.
But I'm also a little bit late, and that's okay, you know. But
Listen,
I'm thorough. But
listen,
you better believe I know what I'm talking about.
you do. I've got a family full of Capricorn risings that I have to live with. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you something.
You poor thing.
It's horrible, especially if they're all late degrees Capricorn and they all have Pluto coming over their ascendants or their moons or whatever. It's like living in this thick-headed crowd of people, right? But the one thing I do know about them is once they get through whatever that is,
Yes,
they're clear.
It's fast.
And they make a change and they make it fast, you
They
know.
don't regret it. No
They
regret.
don't regret it because
No
they
regret.
made the right decision. But living, it's hard. It's hard,
It
you
is.
know.
It is. I think it's true. I heard it in the past, and you might know this, but that Capricorns tend to bloom a little later in life because of the Saturnian influence, and I can see that for myself.
They're
I had fun in
definitely
my
late
youth,
bloomers.
though, bouncing around and then kind of settling into myself as I grown up, you know. So
No, I think Capricorns kind of grow backwards. I think they start out like Merlin, you know, they start out old and they, you know, get younger as they get older because they shed their Capricorn crust.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
They
that's
get
what they
tired
do.
of the old stuff. They get out of it.
In 10 years, you're going to be a stand-up comic. By the way, a lot of comics have a lot of Capricorn.
Oh, that's hysterical.
Oh yeah, they have a lot to share. Jokingly.
That's funny. That is very
Well,
funny.
I know about Capricorn. I have Jupiter in Capricorn. That's probably why they're all in my life, because my Jupiter's on their ascendant and I can put up with them. But I'll tell you something, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really
that is
tough. I have a
definitely true.
dignified Saturn in Capricorn.
I mean,
Totally
you
dignified.
gotta have a sense of humor. They do have a pretty good sense of humor. It's pretty dry. I
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Totally dry.
And sometimes it's even a little irreverent, which I appreciate, politically
Yes.
incorrect.
Yes.
But I
that's
do
very
I
true.
do appreciate them when they're in a relaxed mode. But one thing about the Capricorn energy, though, is if there's a crisis,
They're on it.
They're on it, man.
Yep.
They can withstand hail, hurricanes, sleets, snowstorms, fires, crises, come out just calm as they can be. The rest of the
Right.
world is falling apart,
Right.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah,
That's
so
true.
everybody has their gifts,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's totally true. So, wow, this was so interesting, and I'm so excited to be able to hear more of your lecture and hear about what you have to say and teach us, because you have so many years of wisdom and all this knowledge behind you. So, yeah, do either
It'll
of you
be
guys
fun.
have any questions for Georgia before we wrap up?
So one thing in your class that you're going to teach, if a person is a beginner, is this going to be something they're going to be able to understand?
Yes,
Perfect.
I try to design all my classes for beginning, intermediate, advanced.
In advance. Okay, wonderful.
Because
we're going to try to. One of the things we're going to try to do is definitely mark, the different topics and the discussion, so that if a person's a beginner, so they can know, like, is this something I can understand and get something out of it? So that's good to know.
Yeah, I've Kepler, we had to learn that, because when I taught the 8 years for the undergraduate there, we had some people that were students that had the experience, and some people were absolutely new in it. So
Okay.
we had to be very clear. And I'm very visual. I have a lot of visuals because I know everybody has a different learning style.
Yeah.
Having taught for about 40 years now. So it'll be right brain for the right brain people, it'll be kinesthetic, it'll be auditory. And so I think anybody would get something from it. At least
it sounds like you're pulling from, I mean, you made a statement there, which I really like and kind of use a lot, is, does it work? That's something you're coming from, is, does it work?
Right.
Because you can teach a lot of things in astrology that are theory or, just tradition, but you don't necessarily use it.
That's exactly right.
I'm getting the feeling from you, we're going to hear the stuff you use, the stuff works, the stuff.
That's the only stuff I teach.
Every day.
Yeah, I do. Thanks for saying that, because everything I teach, I use it.
Yeah.
You know,
and that really, to me, that means a lot, because it's like, these are your practices. This is what you do. There's always, I find, astrologers have their go-tos. Like, this is what I look at first. This is what I go to, because this is what I'm used at. That's how I sort of build. For me, it's always about building a story. I try to understand a person from building a story.
Right.
I need to see the story, the overall story, and then where are they in the story? Kind of that.
Very good. That's, where are you in your story? That's
where
exactly
are you in
right.
your story? Yeah.
And
I really like when you were talking about the age cycles. It's like, oh, that's a good, where are you in your story type thing.
Where are you in your story? And the thing is, a lot of, you get a lot of these I don't want to go into too much detail, but, perfection wheels and stuff. Because people are living a lot longer. I've got the age cycles going out all the way to 105 or 106 years of age, because the second Chiron return comes around 104, and it's not so impossible anymore,
Right.
People are actually starting a lot of new parts of their lives in their 60s, 70s, and 80s now, and so I think that's important. I'm hoping that anybody will get it. And if they don't like it, they could always walk out of the room. I won't be offended. I've walked out of rooms several times.
Well, I think
Yeah.
you will have the PowerPoint, which they will get the PDF version of it.
Right.
They with any of these lectures, you just don't jump and use it. You're gonna have to study the PowerPoint, review it, apply it to your charts, to your clients, and see if it works for you.
Mm-hmm.
But based on your
Exactly.
explanation, it sounds like it's gonna work because I start with the chart at age 1. So
Mm-hmm.
this this thing really works.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
And if any of us are gifted enough to have the ability to juggle several of the things we do together,
yeah,
because that's, I mean, I think in many ways we're alchemists when we
Yes.
work with horoscopes, because and if you've been doing it long enough, and you guys all know this because you've been doing it a long time, that
yeah,
you're working with one way, and then you remember something that you did before that will apply to this person that you may
yeah.
not use with another person.
Right.
Especially when you come to, like, I noticed with a chart, if you come to a place where, and this happens not very frequently because I prepare pretty well, but you'll come to a place where suddenly there's a dead end. It's like, wait, that's not making any sense. But then you remember something that would maybe open up the dead end, and that's what always works.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely making sense. Yes. That's part of the idea, again, with the conference being convergence. The idea is that you're bringing in different modalities,
Right.
different ways
Yeah.
of, and really what it is, it's different ways of looking at the chart. It's a different vantage point that they can be. And when you see it the way you normally are seeing it, okay, your traditions, what you do well, but then if you can find different vantage points, you don't have to
Mhm.
be an expert in the total area, but if you can find this tool or that tool,
Mhm.
it gives you a better range where,
Mhm.
like you said,
Yeah.
when you're like something isn't making sense and you know
Right.
it. Any
Right.
astrologer, if you just push through that, come on, that's
Yeah.
not being honest. You have to pull back and say, wait a minute.
Something's
This is
not working.
not what's the, yeah, this is
Yeah.
not making sense in my head here. Something, I'm missing something here.
Yeah.
And to be able to have another tool to kind of bring
Yeah.
that in and use that. Let me step back. Let me look at that. Well, like, again, when you're talking, when you were saying that, and when you were describing something, my mom came right to my head.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
Pull her chart up. Oh, boom. There it is.
That was
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
It's
it's like,
amazing.
that's it. Because you're describing, I mean, again, being born in the first year of your life, your mother passes away. You don't know your father. You end up being raised by your grandma in a little log cabin in Missouri.
Wow.
This is, yes, this
Yeah.
is okay. Yes, this is your life changes immediately.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
know,
this is a very, I'm going off on a tangent here. I know we have to end this thing, but there is, it would be interesting to put this in here too. There's this whole thing about what our destiny is, right?
Mhm.
So in many ways, when you think about that, her destiny was changed.
Right there.
Right there, it was changed. Like Nancy, my client, her destiny, she didn't have any control. It
Yeah.
changed, right?
Yeah.
And I think we can, I mean, I'm doing a workshop in, oh God, when is it? It's November for WASA, for the Washington State, on moments of opportunity. And you just gave me an idea, because I'm going to be covering some of this and other things, but those are like, when there's a change in the road, there's suddenly a change in the road that you really have no control over. And that is, I think, 29 to 0.
Mm.
I think that is actually
like
what
almost
that
like
is.
you have the ability to step through a Stargate type thing where
That's so
you
good
can,
what you just said. Yeah, like something opens up and you could go through it or not. I mean,
or not.
yeah, you
Yes.
can choose not to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see a lot of that sort of thing in the next 2 years, as all these outer planets are going 29, 0,
Yes, a lot of
29.
them.
Yeah, I know. I just made a pretty major business decision for my investment company, which was a big decision, to let go of some things and just hold them until some opportunities present themselves. Because I feel in the next 2 years, there's going to be a very big change in the world in terms of investments, big. And that what we are seeing as models right now, because, basically I'm a business astrologer, but I do a lot of natal work too. I watched the models over the years, and it just feels like with Neptune at the end and Uranus at the end and Saturn at the beginning going to the end, that the models we see for our lives and business are going to be so different. Housing's going to be different.
Yes.
We're going to see very different ways. Data centers are taking over some of the farmland in the Midwest because we do a lot of farm work. And Microsoft is going into the Midwest, putting up data centers now.
Wow.
Because they need the data centers for AI.
AI is going to change everything.
And then you have to have, I was just reading today, because I read all this stuff, the cooling, you have to have cooling systems for the AI. And that's going to be another industry.
Mass energy for the AI. Yes, it's a big energy
going
pull.
through the Stargate window, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is a totally, as much as the internet changed our life, AI will do even more.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah, it'll change it even more. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface.
We are.
If you remember the internet when it first came out and you tried to pull a picture up, it took hours.
Oh, I remember.
To pull a picture up. Yeah.
I remember.
And that was not that long ago. So the idea when they were saying, "Oh, we're going to be you could watch a movie on this," I'm like, yeah, right. It took an hour to pull one shot up.
Right.
Yeah, we're not watching any movies here. And
Christopher, this is interesting because, the Saturn-Uranus conjunction is every 45 years. I wrote about this in my synodic cycle book, Pushing Through Time. And right after World War II, Saturn-Uranus, that's when the interstate highway system grew. And then 1988 came along and you had Saturn-Uranus 2955 Sag. That's when the information highway started.
Yep.
Now in 2032, it's going to be Saturn-Uranus 28, almost 29 Gemini.
AI.
So we've gone from interstate highways to information highways to God knows what, flying cars, probably flying cars.
Oh, I think it'll be way beyond that.
Or flying taxis.
I'm going to get one. I'm going to get one of those.
So that's happened over 45-year slots.
Yeah.
The Saturn-Uranus conjunction. But the last one in 88 was 2955 Sag. And, even though those synodic cycles have passed, they're still alive and well, right? So what's going on right now? Transit Neptune is squaring the Saturn-Uranus of 1988 at 2955.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think we're coming into a travel of augmented reality where you're going to be able to climb mountains in your living room, and it's going to literally feel, smell, everything will be as though you're on that mountain and you'll be in your living room.
So does this mean we're going to leave our bodies and just become brains?
That's not I
don't want to be here for that.
It's not like that will not be optional, or that could be optional down the road. I mean, these are going to be questions we're going to have to face, because that changes everything. That changes everything. I mean, we are Earth beings.
We are.
And if it's like, that's a different kind of being.
Very different. I think about stuff like this all the time, and I'm not crazy, but I do think about it because I see a lot of people on computers all the time. What's happening to their bodies?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, the kids. Just look at the kids.
I mean, they don't know how to talk to each other. They don't even date. They don't even date.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But there's good things. There's bad, every
it's
revolution.
Life changes. We go through stuff. Yeah. It's good, bad. It just is.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this sounds great.
Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thank you. You guys are a lot of fun.
Thank you, Georgia. It was wonderful having you on the podcast with us. We really appreciate having you. And we look forward to seeing you at the conference too.
Oh, I look forward to seeing you guys too.